Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us at the Roundtable discussion with human rights education practitioners. A roundtable organized as part of the 5030 Remember seminar. This is in the framework of 5030 Remember from World War II to the End of Communist project coordinated by CoconutWork and organized in the framework of Europe for Citizens program. The project refers to remembrance of the 80 years since the beginning of World War II. The end of World War II has led to 50 years of authoritarian regimes in many Central and Eastern European countries, culminating with the democratic revolutions from 1989. More than 30 years went on since then, and many citizens, especially young people, have a limited understanding of the implications of the World War II on Europe and in building democracies. Also, European youth of less than 30 years have never lived under authoritarianism, and they might have taken for granted the democracy. What we want to achieve through this program is creating an awareness on the topic, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to this discussion. We'll have keynote experts with us, and I want to welcome our four guest speakers. Simina Badica, curator at the European House of History. Hi, welcome.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Rafał Rogulski, director at the Institute of European Network Remembrance and Solidarity. Hello,
Hello.
thank you for
Hi.
joining.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Oana Nestian-Sandu, director international program at the Olga Lengyel Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. Hello, thank you for joining.
Hello, hi everyone.
And Gheorghe, expert at the Theodor Herzl Center for Israel Studies. Hi, thank you for joining.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
As you see, we have some high-level keynote speakers, and I'm curious about their inputs. I hope you are all enthusiastic about it. I see the viewers are joining as well. We encourage you to comment with your questions because we are going to have some Q&A session after the presentation. So keep an eye on the insightful inputs, and then let's see the questions you have. We are going to have live questions from the Facebook video that we have, but also some of the 5030 seminar participants joining us to interact directly with the experts. So thank you so much for joining. Let's head to our first speaker, Simina. I will briefly introduce her as the curator of the European House of History. Simina Badica teaches museum studies at the National School for Political and Administrative Studies in Bucharest, Romania. Previously, she worked as researcher and then head of ethnological archives at the Romanian Peasant Museum in Bucharest, where she was also the editor of the academic journal Martor. She curated several exhibitions in Bucharest on the themes of recent history. Simina has a PhD in history from Central European University in Budapest with a dissertation on curating communism, a comparative history of museological practices in post-war and post-communist Romania. She writes and gives talks on the communist and post-communist memorial phenomena, museum representations of difficult past, communism heritage, and its potential reuse, the specificities of prison museums and museums building in transitions periods. We are so happy that you join us in the roundtable, and we are looking forward to hearing your insights.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm also really looking forward to the discussion. I am trying to give some input or food for thought to steer up the discussion in this very big subject, which is memory and remembrance. And as the organizers asked us, challenges to remembering. So to think about challenges to remembering. What I'm going to talk about today is the way the House of European History is dealing with this matters as we speak. So, okay, thank you for opening my presentation. I will try to be short, and I will show you just a little bit of what we do here at the House of European History, some images and some excerpts of how we deal with memory in this museum. So the House of European History, next slide please, is a very new museum. And what I like to think is that it's a new and bold museum. So this is the building of the museum in Park Leopold in Brussels. It's a museum that was opened in 2017. And it has already received more than 500,000 visitors, and this taking into account the restrictions of this pandemic period. So we've had a very good start. One of the ways in which we define ourselves is as a reservoir of European memory. So the issue of memory is very close to our concept and to what we want to convey to our visitors. And as the title of my presentation is Historicizing Memory, I think the one thing I will try to show you in this 5 minutes is that the way we think about memory at the House of European History is quite special, seeing that we see memory as a defining subject of European history in the 20th century. So it's not only a reflection of history, but it has become part of history. It influences how we live our everyday lives, the decisions we take, and it has in itself a history. So it's not like a fixed, defined subject, this memory that we talk about, but it's a fluid and ever-changing phenomenon. Next slide, please. We have a few sections in our exhibition where we explicitly deal with memory. And we actually start our permanent exhibition with a section that's called Memory and European Heritage. And in the memory section, we of course refer to this quote by George Santayana about those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But we actually put a question mark after this, and the text of this section of the exhibition reads, if we remember the past, can we avoid repeating its mistakes? And I think this question mark is very important because the way we discuss with our visitors in this museum is, I like to think, a very free and open one. So we do allow ourselves to ask questions and our visitors to ask questions. Next slide, please. Also in this memory and European heritage section, we display and discuss the different instances that memory takes in European history. Like, for example, and this is only a selection of how we look at memory from different sides. Yeah, so it's not only this, but I selected 3 instances. One is memory with a political meaning and how it can be a battleground, and the destruction of memory as seen as an attack against human integrity and cultural self-determination. And for this, we exhibit a book that was in the National University Library in Bosnia-Herzegovina in Sarajevo, and that was deliberately bombed. So we display a book that has survived this attack on cultural memory. Then we talk about how memory is subjective and highly influenced by circumstance. And this here we exhibit the diary of Anne Frank, this young Jewish girl who was hiding in Amsterdam during Nazi occupation, and how this book has stirred up, even though it's a very personal account of her experience during Holocaust, it has stirred up a whole memorial field and awareness on the Holocaust. We then also talk about, and I think this can this is quite courageous in a history museum, we talk about how memory and history can also be a form of imprisonment in the past. Ritual recalling the wrongs of history can be an impediment to future progress, with the present being sacrificed for the glorification of the past. And here we exhibit the James Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses, where he rejects the sometimes narrow and politically motivated national view of history that developed in Europe in the 19th century. So these are some of the questions that we open up in the introductory section of our permanent exhibition. And then we follow memory as a sort of red thread through European history in the 20th century. I probably should have said this also for those who have not visited the museum, that this is a museum that mainly deals with 20th century history, European history. The next section where we explicitly deal with history is a section that it's called the memory of the Shoah, that's integrated in the post-war section. And here we look at 6 case studies, so 6 countries, and the very different way in which they have dealt with the memory of the Holocaust in the post-war period. So we look at Western and Eastern Germany, so democratic and federal Germany, Austria, Poland, Ukraine, and France. And we look at how silence, non-recognition, and repression and the manner in which the Holocaust was treated in the post-war period. We look at the way nations desperate to redeem self-esteem put aside feelings of guilt and complicity and wallowing in their own memories of suffering and hardship instead of taking into account their own collaboration with the Nazi regime. Today, however, we continue the acknowledgement of this unparalleled crime against humanity is at the core of discussions about a European memory. So I think this section is very good in allowing the visitors to see that even the memory of Holocaust, which is one of the most solid, and as we say, it's at the core of European memory, has not always been fixed. It's something that we developed together throughout the decades, and it had its own history and development. And next slide, and I promise we are approaching the end because I promise to be very short. Towards the end of our permanent exhibition, there is a section called Shared and Divided Memory, and here we deal with the memory of communism and how it has changed European memory. We talk about the clash between the memory of the Holocaust and the memory of communism. We talk about the troubles that the memory of communism has caused in Eastern Europe. And we look at museums and memorials. We look at statues and street names and the process of changing them. We look at the opening of the files of the former political police and how and the turmoil that this process triggered, and the many things that were unraveled, but also the many things that remain hidden. So to sum up, and very briefly, while inviting all of you to come to Brussels to see the museum, but also to check out very soon, I think at the beginning of next year, our virtual guided tour of the permanent exhibition. So we are also preparing something for people who cannot make it to Brussels. So to sum up, I think what we're trying to do in our museum is to train our visitors, to teach them not the correct memory, not the things that we want them to know, but a way of approaching memory and feeling responsibility and interest and curiosity and challenging what has been given to them as a memorial culture, and discovering their own approach to this by showing that this memorial culture has always been constructed by people and nations and societies and communities who have been interested in constructing this, and sometimes even challenging what they thought was given to them as not the correct narrative. So I just one more slide. Again, at the end, also I want to bring to your attention, since there are a lot of human rights educators among us, that we have on our website prepared some working material for the classroom. This is for ages 12 to 15, precisely on human rights, and they can be downloaded, and you can work with your students on this. There are many examples and exercises that you can do together. And on the next slide, you will see that these exercises and this group exercises on human rights, next slide please, are in the 24 languages of the European Union. So here I've chosen a language that I do not speak, which is Greek, and but only to show that you can find it in your own language also. So I will stop here. I see I have a question in the chat, but I don't know if this is the moment to answer them or.
Thank you so much for sharing these insights and good practices from the from the House of European History in Brussels. We are looking forward to hearing the answers to the questions in the Q&A session. So thank you for now, Simina. And I would like to welcome Rafael Rogulski, our next speaker. He's the director at the Institute of European Network, Remembrance and Solidarity since 2010. He studied cultural and political science at the universities of Wrocław and Marburg and participated in the executive MBA program at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. From 2001 to 2005, he was the secretary of the Culture, Science and Information Department at the Polish Embassy in Berlin. He was an assistant and then an advisor to Professor Władysław Bartoszewski, first at the Polish Robert Schuman Foundation and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and later at the Chancellery at the Prime Minister of Poland. In the late 90s, Rogulski worked as a journalist for the Daily Life and the bi-monthly journal Europa. Thank you so much for joining us. We are looking forward to hearing your insights as well.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much. Hello once more. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. I will try to give you a broader picture about our institution, so European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, which is an international institution acting at the field of historical policy. Should I share my screen and presentation, or you will take responsibility for that? I'm sorry, this is the question to the organizers.
We can see it now. It's added to the stream, so you can.
Okay, I will.
Your own based.
Okay, okay. So thank you very much. So next slide, please. Okay, it works. Thank you very much. So the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity is a network which includes the states, and the fully member states are Poland, Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. But additionally involve some representatives of Austria, Czech Republic, Lithuania, Estonia, Albania, and Georgia, which have an observer status. But the European Network Remembrance Solidarity acts in every European countries and with some projects also we go to United States or to Japan. There is no place for presenting every of our project, but I will give you some general information which project these are. So INRS activities include cyclical projects, annually conferences and symposia, networking meetings. For example, European Remembrance Symposium, annually networking meeting of representatives of such institutions which are dealing with which deal with the 20th century history. Last symposium ended some days ago in Tallinn. The next one will be organized in the first half of the next year in Dublin. We do also multi-annual traveling exhibition. For example, after the Great War, the big open-air exhibition, which is traveling now through European countries. And the theme of this exhibition is connected with the first 5 years after the First World War, how the so-called New Europe was founded after the First World War. But there is also Between Life and Death exhibition, which is now shown in Japan, and which is connected with Holocaust and with the victims of Holocaust, with the survivors from Holocaust and their helpers. We do also some annual information campaigns connected with 23rd August, so European Day of Remembrance of victims of totalitarian regimes, and another campaign connected with January 27th, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, as well as recognized and awarded educational project, which I will be presenting shortly. So, as I said, we are active in almost every European countries. We have over 460 partner institutions from 39 countries, not only in Europe. So, our educational project, main educational projects, these are High Story Lessons. This is a multilingual educational platform, online platform, supporting the process of teaching and learning about 20th century European history. Then In Between, this is a cycle of study visits for young professionals focused on conducting oral history research at the European borderlands. And Sound in the Silence, it's an intercultural and international remembrance project for youth at historically challenging locations like places where the concentration camps, the memory places after concentration camps. And these young people, young students, work with artistic representing different artists, representing different artistic fields in order to understand how the past is connected with their questions in the present. These young people are confronted with this painful history of the place, and then prepare together. Prepare theater presentation. I will tell you shortly something more about each of those projects, but now please give me a chance to say some words about what we think about challenges in human rights and especially history education. These are the challenges that we face in history education. There is also the issue of balancing online and on-site experiences, which these days are both very important to not only young people and, in our opinion, complement each other. These new means and channels are very important for contemporary youth. There was even an opinion in the survey which you sent us that some of the ways of commemorating past events seems outdated and lack perspective attracting to young people. I will show you how we try to tackle these challenges on the example of specific educational projects implemented by ENRS. So let me tell you a bit more about this project, and on the screen you can see, or you will see, the characteristic of the specific projects that answer these challenges. So No to Disinformation is an online learning toolkit developed by ENRS in the year 2021 that is available online from the platform High Story Lessons. It is an educational package for youth that in an attractive and accessible way explains historical manipulation and other aspects of disinformation. The toolkit is supplemented with short videos and the subject on the subject. I would like to quickly show you one of them. The organizers will forward you to the links to these materials and follow up in a follow up email after the seminar. But if we could now show the short film.
It is only natural that we all remember certain events differently. The real problem starts, however, when a dispute becomes a true memory war. Then the arguments are frequently distorted by disinformation, manipulation, and fake news. When looking for information, we often turn to Wikipedia. It is a great source of knowledge created by people from all over the world. Unfortunately, some may abuse its open format and manipulate the contents of Wikipedia entries by omitting certain facts, selecting sources in a biased way, or even adding lies. You needn't be a victim of disinformation. We will show you how to recognize the manipulations and lies relating to history. We invite you to visit historylessons.eu.
So thank you very much. More of such info materials you can see on our internet page. The next project in between is an oral history research study visit project connected with the European borderlands. It has been organized by ENRS since 2016. Participating students aged between 18 and 25 are given an opportunity to conduct oral history research in the European borderlands, gaining theoretical knowledge and interdisciplinary and practical skills. They collect audio and video recordings of individual historical narrations and scans of private photographs in order to share them with museums and historical archives. The participating students represent various fields of interests, including history, cultural anthropology, sociology, linguistic, and arts. First, they take part in interdisciplinary workshops, learning the basic of conducting interviews, digital video camera operation, photography, digitalizing visual materials, labeling collected materials with metadata and the necessary historical context. Later on, having been split into smaller groups, they travel to the borderlands regions in order to speak with representatives of the local communities. in the scope of the project INRS, organized 19 study visits in cooperation with 86 local partners for 135 participants who conducted almost 200 interviews. The project received a special mention of Europa Nostra Award in the year 2018. The next and last project, Sound in the Silence, is an international interdisciplinary educational project delivered by the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity in cooperation with the cultural center Die Motte from Hamburg since 2011. Its main goal is to familiarize adult scans attending upper secondary schools with some difficult aspects of Europe's past in the way that matches their emotional sensitivity. Guided by artists and educators, the participants visit memorial sites where they explore selected events from the history of totalitarianism in Europe. Then, referring to their own emotions and experience, they process to newly acquired knowledge during art workshops of several days. Their work finds its culmination in the public performance, which combines various genres of art, dance, theater, music, and stage setting. Also, as we can see from the results of the survey, visiting historical places and memorials is still a relevant way of commemorating past events for young people. Both projects, In Between and Sound in the Silence, not only allow the participants to explore a specific topic related to 20th century history, but also enable them to gain the expertise, know-how, and tools useful outside of the project environment. At the end, before I say thank you very much, I would like to tell you that INRS is looking for interns, especially university students with a passion for history, for a chosen 2 until 3 month period in 2022 in our Warsaw office within the Erasmus Plus internship program. Please see the news section on our website for more details if you are interested in. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for your insights. It was a pleasure to hear you. And thank you also for the opportunity. So students, if you are interested in taking an internship, please do not hesitate to apply for that. Thank you so much. And we are looking forward to having you during the Q&A session as well. And I want to introduce our next speaker, Oana Nestian-Sandu, International Program Director at the Olga Lengyel Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights, New York, and Program Director at the Intercultural Institute, Timișoara. She has a PhD in social psychology and vast experience developing educational programs for teachers and youth in Europe, United States, and MENA region. Her fields of interest are human rights education, Holocaust education, intercultural education, and education for democratic citizenship. She consults for the Council of Europe and the United Nations and teaches 2 undergraduate courses, intercultural education and civic education at the West University of Timișoara. Oana, it's really nice to have you here. We are really looking forward to hearing your insights as well.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be together with you today. And I want to share with you our perspective at the Olga Lengyel Institute when it comes to remembrance and particularly Holocaust education. What you can see on the screen is a title that we often use for our educational programs, Learning from the Past, Acting for the Future. And I want to present to you a perspective that uses human rights education as a framework for reflecting and acting on past and current injustices. Next slide, please. Our organization was established by Olga Lengyel. Olga Lengyel was a Holocaust survivor. She was deported from Cluj, Transylvania to Auschwitz together with her entire family, her parents, her husband, and her 2 children. And all of them were murdered in Auschwitz. She was the only one who survived, and she wrote one of the first memoirs, her book that you see on the screen, called 5 Chimneys, A Woman Survivor's True Story of Auschwitz, is an account of her time in Auschwitz. She spent almost 2 years in Auschwitz, and she published the book in Paris in 1946, so very soon after the war. And in her book, she writes this: I want to read and to resolve that this must never, never be permitted to happen again. And so the question for us is, how can we honor this wish? And before I tell you what we do at the Olga Lengyel Institute in order to honor her wish and the wish of all Holocaust survivors and people who work in this area, I want to share with you another quote. If we can move forward, please. A quote from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. As we remember those who died in the Holocaust and honor the survivors, our best tribute is the creation of a world of equality, justice, and dignity for all. And this is exactly what we are trying to do through our programs. And earlier in this event, Simona Badica made a reference to one of these famous quotes that if we do not remember the past, we are doomed to repeat it. And we are wondering, as I'm sure the House of European History is wondering, because she mentioned that they put a question mark at the end of this, is this really enough? Is it enough to remember the past, to make sure that we don't repeat it? And we believe that remembering the past is extremely important, but it might not be enough in order to achieve this purpose. Next slide, please. So what we propose is an interdisciplinary approach to combine Holocaust education and human rights education. These 2 subjects, which are usually addressed separately, have a more powerful impact if they inform one another. And I will share with you some examples of how we can use Holocaust education and human rights education in order to create a better world of equality and dignity. And for example, we analyzed the Holocaust and the events that led through it through the lens of human rights. We can look at the legislation that was passed by the Nazis and their collaborators, and we can see that this legislation was in fact a severe human rights violation. Jewish people lost their right to citizenship, for example, or they lost their right to practice certain professions. They could not continue education, or even could not own a bicycle or go to the public swimming pool, and so on and so forth. And we can look at all these events through the lens of human rights, even if the modern framework of human rights as we know it today was not defined as it is now. It was not defined back then. People still existed, they still had dignity, and so we can use this framework to have a more neutral look at the past. and at the Holocaust specifically, because this is the main topic of our work. We can also, through this interdisciplinary approach, we can learn from the history of the Holocaust in order to promote democratic values and human rights. In the beginning of this presentation, there was a reference to people who are under 30 and who have never lived in totalitarian regimes, for example. And sometimes we might take for granted the democracy that we have today or the mechanisms to promote human rights. And it is important to look at the history and to learn from history what happened when these mechanisms were not in place. And before this meeting, it was shared with us a research that was done in this project. And I was very surprised to see in this research that one of the questions lists several events in the history and ask the respondents to rate them according to the importance. And their country's accession to the European Union was actually marked as not one of the important events in history. And I would actually be very interested to talk about this aspect during our discussion if we will have time. And then the third point I want to raise is that this interdisciplinary approach to teaching about the Holocaust and human rights can also help us understand how important it is to take action today in our contemporary societies. When we study history, when we study the Holocaust, we try to imagine how we would have reacted, what our role would have been had we been alive back then. But thankfully, we were not alive back then, and also we can never know for sure what we would have done in such a situation. But what we know with certainty is what we do today. And we can learn from the behaviors of people who went through these historical events, whether they chose to be bystanders or whether they chose to be upstanders, and to take action when they saw that their neighbors or people whom they never met were in danger. We can learn from this and we can be better citizens today in order to create a fairer society. And so this combined framework can help us not only learn about the past, but also learn from the past and understand that the present is not severed from the past, is a normal continuation of history. And if we're not aware of our history, or if we try to present it in a way that is hiding some aspects of the truth, then we can not progress as a society. And this perspective and this approach that I briefly presented to you at Olga Lengyel, we implemented in our educational programs with teachers in the United States and in Europe. In Europe, we work with teachers in 10 countries so far, and we are expanding every year. So far, we work in Lithuania, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, Italy, Austria, and Portugal. I think I didn't forget any of the countries. And next slide, please. We try to achieve all this through a balanced approach in our educational program. And we want to ensure balance between cognitive and emotional elements. Learning about facts and figures is not enough because it misses the human perspective. So we might actually be desensitized to the past if we don't understand the individual, the personal, the human element of history. On the other hand, if we follow only on emotional or on individual aspects when we learn about history, we lose sight of the magnitude of the Holocaust and of the the scope of the atrocities that happen. We also strive for balance between information about the horrors of the Holocaust and information about the life of Jewish people and other groups before and after the Holocaust. In many countries, the times of when they learn about the Holocaust, young people, it might be the first time when they learn about Jewish history. So it is important to show also the positive aspects of an wide culture and a long history of a people. And then we also strive for balance between reflection and action. As I already mentioned, learning about the past is not enough, but also learning from the past and being active citizens today. And last slide, please. We do all this in order to develop civic and intercultural perspectives. And we were asked to think of the challenges of remembrance. And I want to say that in my perspective, the nationalistic perspectives in teaching history, which are still present today, are one of the main challenges we face when we talk about remembrance. If we don't overcome this, if we don't have an honest look at the past, we will not be able to progress as societies. And at the same time, looking at the general history and at our European continent is very important, but also looking within us and understanding our own identities and our own stereotypes in order to find ways to overcome stereotypes, prejudices, so that we can create democratic and intercultural societies. And with these civic and intercultural competences, we can engage in meaningful interaction with people with diverse backgrounds in order to make sure that something like the Holocaust doesn't happen again, because a lot of it had to do with propaganda and with the fact that people were basing their actions on preconceptions and on prejudices. And we can do all that if we develop respect for human rights and human dignity. And as I already mentioned, find ways to stand up when we see injustices, because we don't only have the tools today to stand up when we see injustices, we also have a huge responsibility to act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood, as the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is encouraging us to do. I see that our moderator is already here, so this is a sign for me that I have to stop, but I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing with us some ways in which we can make human rights education a framework, not only for reflecting, but also for acting. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching our live roundtable with experts, please let us know in the comments what are your questions. The Q&A session is coming soon. Thank you so much. And I would like to welcome our next speaker, Daniel Gheorghe, expert at the Theodor Herzl Center for Israeli Studies. He is currently a PhD student at the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Bucharest, Romania. Between March-August 2019, Daniel was a trainee at the European Commission, where he worked in DG Just under the supervision of the European Coordinator on combating anti-Semitism. During his appointment, Daniel was involved in organizing the EU Commission High-Level Working Group on combating anti-Semitism. His research interests cover topics like EU-Israel relations, anti-Semitism in Europe, political parties, and populism. Thank you for being here, and we are looking forward to hearing your insights as well.
Thank you very much, Diana. Just 1 second to share my screen window. Suppose this is okay. Let's see. It's good. Do you see everything?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Good. 1 second. So, dear organizers of the event, dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to start by thanking you for giving me the opportunity to join you today. In this day so full of symbolism for the European remembrance, as today marks 83 years since the Kristallnacht, and also it marks 32 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Also, I'd like to thank the speakers before me for the very interesting and insightful presentations. I'd like to let know Simina that I visited the museum in 2019, and I really recommend everyone to visit that museum, the House of European History. It is a very well done museum, very interesting, very full of information. So I'm here today to share my experience with the European Commission as a trainee with the DG Justice, just as Diana mentioned earlier, where I was in the Fundamental Rights Unit. And also I'd like to share my experience as a teaching assistant at the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Bucharest. During my time as a Blue Book trainee, I had the chance to work under the direct supervision of the European Coordinator on Combating Anti-Semitism. And although my experience as a practitioner in the field of human rights education is rather a short one, I'd like to bring into discussion a few aspects related to the way in which anti-Semitism sneaks into the perception of the young students. As a researcher in the field of Israel studies and as an assistant teacher of a subject named Zionism, Ideology and National Movement, I had the chance to observe a few anti-Semitic myths that are also strongly connected to the remembrance of the Shoah. Besides the intrinsic role of remembrance, which is to keep us aware of the past events, remembrance strongly contributes to our understanding of the current evolutions of certain phenomena, as it is the case with the anti-Semitism. Before talking about some concrete myths that often are used by the students in an involuntary manner, I would say I would like to present a few theoretical considerations from the related literature. My whole presentation is based upon the idea that the anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitic perception in Romania presents certain particularities that are determined by the historical role played by Romania during World War II in relation to the Jewish population on its territory. Some of these particularities manifested themselves, especially after the anti-communist revolution in Romania, and often were a mix of myths related to the transition period of Romania and also connected to the communist nationalists characterizing the Ceausescu regime. In this regard, Professor Michael Shafir identifies in an article entitled Varieties of Anti-Semitism in Post-Communist Central Europe a set of 3 types of anti-Semitism in the post-communist Romanian society. The first such category focused on the past is that of the self-exculpatory nostalgic anti-Semitism, looking upon the interwar or authoritarian past, I quote, as a model of solving the transitional problems in the past and constructing the country's future. End of the quote. The second type, identified by Professor Shafir, focuses more on the present and manifests a strong utilitarian dimension, while referring, I quote, to the occasional exploitation of anti-Semitic prejudice for the needs of the hour by politicians who, by and large, are not anti-Semitic. Here, the author mentions the examples of the two first Romanian presidents after the revolution, the anti-communist revolution in 1989, Ion Iliescu and Emil Constantinescu. In the case of Iliescu, who used the anti-Semitism as a propelling instrument, this manifested by acknowledging the participation of Romania to the Shoah, in contrast to the desires of his opposition at that moment, the Romanian Nationalist Party, Partidul România Mare, translated the Great Romania Party. Constantinescu also found himself in a similar position when he acknowledged Romanian responsibility for the genocide perpetrated against Jews. I quote, even if at the same time insisting on his country's refusal to deliver its Jews to Hitler. End of the quote. The third category is represented by the reactive anti-Semitism, which, according to Shafir, is focused on the past, present, and future in the same time. The most used leitmotif in this type of anti-Semitism is that of competitive martyrdom, in which the Shoah is often compared with the events in the Soviet Gulag or in the communist prisons, often being connected to the anti-Semitic myth that the Jews brought the communism. This has been called the double genocide or the symmetry approach and has three temporal aspects. First, it is past-oriented in the sense that it explains anti-Semitism by alleged large-scale Jewish collaboration with the Bolsheviks, both on the eve of World War II and after the imposition of communism. But at the same time, and to no lesser extent, it is present-oriented in as much as it serves to reject either local or foreign, in our case, Israeli or Western, pressure to either launch a process of overcoming the negative past or to compensate victims, or both. Finally, it is also future-oriented, since it strives to establish a model of society that is genuinely perceived as no longer haunted by the specters of the past, regardless of the ethnicities of those ghosts. In an inverse Leninist equation, therefore, the double symmetry approach poses the question of kto kavo, and either comes up with the reply that both sides have equally sinned towards one another, the beginning version of competitive martyrdom, or concludes that the balance weighs heavily against those responsible for the gulags, in our case, the Jews. Given this framework and the fact that I personally witnessed expressions connected to such perceptions among some of my students, who, by the way, are political science students, and professionals that I know, I consider that there is one major challenge in Romania regarding the efforts to eliminate such perceptions around anti-Semitism and the remembrance of the Shoah. This challenge, in my opinion, is represented by the lack of an articulated strategy of education for the pupils in all levels of education, especially in the primary schools and high schools. I strongly believe that most of the people I've heard expressing such opinions are not actual anti-Semites, but rather they are victims of the mystification of Romanian history, as well as the influence of other nationalist myths that strengthen these negative perceptions. By not having a strong educational strategy in this direction, many of the young people continue their education and life in society without having these aspects clarified and filtered. Thus, we reach situations like the one mentioned by the European Commission, according to which 1 European in 20 never heard of the Shoah. To this situation, the European Commission plans to react by supporting the creation of a network of places where the Shoah happened, but which are not always known, for instance, hiding places or shooting grounds. The Commission will also support a new network of young European ambassadors to promote remembrance of the Shoah. With EU funding, the Commission will support the creation of a European research hub on contemporary anti-Semitism and Jewish life in cooperation with member states and the research community. To highlight Jewish heritage, the Commission will invite cities applying for the title of European Capital of Culture to address the history of their minorities, including Jewish community history. This challenge, in my opinion, leads to certain discontinuities regarding the way in which the topic of anti-Semitism and remembrance of the Shoah is approached at European level. Only last week, I saw in the news, and this is really good news, although quite late, that a bill mandating the teaching of Shoah history in high schools and vocational schools was passed through the Romanian parliament. Although a little late, as I said earlier, I consider that this step is a continuation of the European strategy towards combating anti-Semitism and understanding the remembrance of the Shoah. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much as well. We are going to start the Q&A session. I will like to welcome all the speakers again to the room. And just to start us off, we have a question from Alexandra. I will put it here. So how can we make remembrance more attractive for young people? What is the best way to use remembrance as a tool for countering populism and youth radicalization? I invite all the speakers, whoever want to take on this, feel free to do so.
I can start if that's okay. I think that the immediate answer to this question would be to use digital tools and use things that are not too long, because young people have a limited attention span and all that, which I think, of course, could be very interesting and very good. But I think there's also something deeper here, and the fact that if young people are involved in something meaningful, and if they have an opportunity to go through processes of experiential learning and not only to just read something or listen to someone talk about history, they are much more willing to get engaged, and they have higher chances of developing the competencies they need. And I think that remembrance can be attractive for young people if it is organized through meaningful processes of experiential learning, and it allows young people to engage in longer processes and processes which help them understand how the past is linked to the present, and how their lives can be enriched by learning about the past and then using their competencies in the present.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I think adding one sentence to what was said, that quite important would be also to give young people the opportunity to meet with people from different countries, and based on a different knowledge and confront them together with some historical events and give them the opportunity to exchange for their opinions. I think the historical knowledge is an immunization for populism or against populism and radicalization, but the main aim of our institutions, all of our institutions, is to attract people with the history and to give them the chance to go deeper. So through such project which can give young people the chance to meet people from other countries, also people of from our other generations, to exchange different feelings about the history and the events, historical events between generations would be also very important issue. Thank you.
I'd like to say a few words. I think that, in my opinion, what would help to make this the remembrance more attractive, to call it like this, would be, first of all, to have an effort made by the educational institutions, as well as by, in general, public institutions, to make the events of commemoration in general more visible and more, more interesting for the young people, because as I can say from my experience as a person who attended many of these commemoration events, these events are usually, you can see pretty much every time the same faces, and you have always like adults and officials who come there and attend these events, and usually the presence of young people is very low. And I think that up to a certain extent, the fault, if I can say like this, belongs to the education institutions, to schools, to Ministry of Education. There are no governmental whatever initiatives towards this aspect. As about using the remembrance as a tool for countering populism and youth radicalization, of course, youth radicalization has much deeper and more complex causes, and the most visible one usually is poverty. But of course, as I said also in my presentation, giving the young people access to stories and to places which can help them to empathize more. It was mentioned earlier in a presentation, the case of Anne Frank. But of course, although the case of Anne Frank is very famous, there are many, many other stories of young people who died during the Shoah and also during the communist regime all across the Eastern Europe. These stories have to become more visible so that the young people have more access to them, and in this way increase their empathy and understanding of and also of the appreciation of the times in which they live.
Thank you very much.
If I may,
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Also intervene just to say a few words. From someone working in a museum, which is in a way coming from the old way or the old school of remembering, I would say that what I'm hearing here, and it's very nice to hear, is that is also a sort of difference between an active and a passive way of remembering. And I think this is very important when we talk about youth. I think this old style of commemorations, where we are surprised that not more young people are participating, in a way, it's normal because this is very passive. And I think I see a switch here, and in what the my colleague panelists have shown, and the European network, Remembrance and Solidarity, the projects that you have showed, I think they are exactly the type of things that that are this form of active remembering. So people who do oral history projects, who do projects in which they are involved, I think this is the type of thing that makes remembrance not a passive thing, something that you witness, but something that you are part of. So, and I think museums can still do their part. So we are still providing a sort of context. We also organize a lot of events in which we try to stimulate this active remembrance processes, but also to provide a context for young people who have already become interested by participating in the events and programs organized by so many organizations present here today, but others also. And then they become interested. They realize that there is something relevant for them there. I think that's a very important moment for young people, where they actually realize that what they are learning and what has happened is actually relevant for them, because it's maybe something that changed the life of their parents or their grandparents or their city and their friends, and suddenly it's interesting, and maybe it's something that they never heard before, or something that contradicts what they've always heard until that moment. And I think that's when people get really interested in history, and I think this is what we need, not just some passive remembrance and some sort of polite deference for victims in general. And I think, it's the question was very good, and yes, we should try to make it more attractive in this way. And there have been many very good examples here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this food for thought. And I would like to introduce you to Petruța. She's one of our 50-30 seminar participants, and she has a question. So if you would like to grab the mic and ask your question. Petruța, can you hear us? Maybe until Petruța solves her tech issues. Enrico, would you like to go for your question? Enrico is also our seminar participant, so please go ahead with your question. If you can unmute yourself. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Enrico Radia from Torino, Italy, and I'm mainly a youth worker and a mentor for youth organization here in the city. I have a few questions, but maybe just one, the bigger one. Okay. And is for Ms. Badica, but in particular, but everybody can ask, of course. And historicizing the memories, you said, it's a very huge task and a very ambitious one, because memories, as you said, can be battlegrounds, as we experience every year here in Italy, 27th of January or 25th of April, when there are these remembrances, in particular those days, very, very underlined, also with street fightings, not just with intellectual fightings. So my question is, how is the process you want to use? What are the tools you want to use to historicize the memories that are very different memories, in particular of World War II, fascism, and communism, but also about a very simple question, like, for example, the question, what are the beginning date of World War II? Which is something that in Europe is different for every country, more or less. So this is the main question. If I have something else about Wikipedia, but I give the ground to somebody else.
Thank you for your questions and for your interest in our museum. I think I would answer in two ways. One is that when I named my presentation Historicizing the Memory, the House of European History, I really meant, I was not referring to specific memories, but to memory in general. So what we do in our museum is that we really look at memory as an important topic or subject of European history in the 20th century. Because as we know, memory itself, so the memory wars, for example, that Professor Rogulski talked about, they have triggered actual wars. And I'm just thinking now of the wars in ex-Yugoslavia, but of course it's not the only example, but it's such an excellent example to show how some memory wars that have been artificially stopped after the Second World War. So complete silence, we don't discuss who killed whom and what atrocities happened. And then they are just taken over again in the 1990s with a force that almost no one believed it was possible, that it was still there. So, so as I said, so memory wars gave rise to real wars, and also memory itself, it has a history. This is what I mean by historicizing memory. So the memory of the Holocaust, I think, is the best example, and we have it in our museum, and visitors can see how in different countries and in different decades, the Holocaust has been looked at and reported differently depending on the circumstances. And I think this is important to see, also to understand the clash, the fall of communism. So this, let's say, this big memorial burden that fell on Europe with the fall of communism and the conflict that it brought, because it seemed very simple when there was only Holocaust. But then when you had also the memory of communism, so you had the victims turning into perpetrators and the perpetrators into victims. That is a very difficult East European and socialist heritage that we really need to deal with, so we don't have, as you said, fighting in the streets over certain dates. So I think the reason why we are able to do this is that our position as a museum is more the position of an observer. So we observe, we don't decide what is the beginning of the Second World War. We don't decide who is right. We don't decide what is the correct perspective or memory on communism or on Holocaust, or who won the Second World War, because every nation has a different opinion on that. But we observe and we show the visitors how different the same event can be looked at. Of course, not dismissing the facts that do exist. So we are not, do not imagine that we are in some sort of totally counterfactual history where anything could have happened. So it's not that. And I think Daniel can confirm, because he visited, and it's we do have historical facts, but we also show a bit what are the debates around them.
If I may, before I leave, because I have to leave shortly, according to House of European History, with this institution, we have been in contact since the beginning of the idea. And I've been many times also. I visited the house many times. I'm not uncritical about the exhibition, but I have the ability in this institution, and it is not really common ability. If we speak about museums, that this is an institution in the stable development process. So there is always the possibilities to change something, to add something, to exchange something, to organize something together with someone, to discuss some issues. And I think this is behind the establishing of this institution, was this idea to support the discussion about history of European countries, European nations, and of history of Europe as such. So this is a process, and this museum is also a process in stable development, which I really appreciate. I'm very sorry, but I have to leave now. But thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the discussion. And I will ask the organizers to send us your addresses, and please feel being invited to our next symposium, European Remembrance Symposium in Dublin, but also feel being invited to our different activities, which you can see on our Facebook, on our Twitter, and on our internet page. Thank you once more, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much as well for your contributions, and looking forward to seeing you next times.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you also, Enrico, for your question. And I will invite now Daniela, a participant in our seminar. We still have time for 2 short questions. So let's go for Daniela's question first.
Hi, I'm Daniela. I'm from Romania, and my passion for World War II, and specifically my passion for Holocaust, made me participate in this project. And I'm thankful for the opportunity, for giving me the opportunity of asking my question live. So I know that after Shoah ended, many Jews were sent on labor camps in Siberia and died there in a similar way. Recently, I've seen a move against Jews on different social media platforms. So why do you think people still have this kind of stereotypes? And can there be a different way of educating people about not only about Holocaust, but different violation of human rights besides the school? Because many of them from poor zones don't have the opportunity to attend school. I really hope my question was clear enough.
Okay, I'm gonna start to answer this question. So when it comes to stereotypes, you know, your question that why people still have stereotypes, so it's a very good question, and I think we could talk about this for many hours. But one of the reasons why people still have stereotypes is that they have not developed their critical thinking to understand actually what stereotypes are and why they were transmitted from generation to generation, and to understand that something that has been fed to them maybe by their parents, maybe even by their teachers, or in the literature they read, or in the music they heard, is actually a stereotype and should be challenged. And you know, all of us, we have stereotypes, and this is the work that we all have to do if we want to be able to move forward and to move away from the behaviors of our ancestors. And that is to look in the mirror and to see what stereotypes we have. Where did we get them from, and what can we do to overcome them and to stop this cycle and to no longer pass them on to our children and to future generations. And when it comes to to involving young people, and I think this also is linked to the first question, I think that an important aspect is to address local history, because this is more tangible for young people. We can talk about European history by starting to talk about local history, and often local history is overlooked. We talk about the decisions of the Nazis, even if we are not from Germany, but we forget to talk about what happened in our country, and we certainly forget to talk about what happened in our city or village. And there is tangible history everywhere. And through our programs, we support teachers to work with their students in local projects, and they go out of school and they meet with Jewish and Roma survivors. Of course, this is possible less and less now, but it was still possible in the recent years. They go and they visit cemeteries. They go and even if there are no longer people there, there's still buildings and this heritage that they can discover, and they can start to learn from what exists in their proximity.
Thank you so much, and thank you,
Thank you.
Daniela, for the question. I would like to also give the floor to Petruța. She has some tech issues, but she is here with us. So would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, sorry for my technical problems. I hope that you can hear me now. My name is Petruța, and I live in a small town in the northeast of Romania. I am president of the school council of the students of my high school, Regina Maria Dorohoi, and vice president of the county council of students from Botoșani County. They are the only structures that defend the interest of students in my region, promoters of the development of the school climate, but also a framework for development, authentic civic education, and training of authentic citizens. This structure is born precisely from the diversity of expressions, attitudes, and beings that revolve around its strong axis. And I would like to ask you an aspect related to the roots of Holocaust or outbreak. In his book, Hitler, in Mein Kampf from 1925, presented the theory of Aryan superiority, considering that the Germans represented the superior race, and that they had to subdue the lower races and exterminate the impure races like Jews or Gypsies. At the center of Nazi ideology being nationalism and anti-Semitism. I always had the curiosity, where did these ideas of Hitler come from?
May I? Okay, so Petruța, this is a very complex question, and the reply to your question is like very, very large. And I would like to start by saying that anti-Semitism itself is a very irrational phenomenon. Jews are hated for various and often opposite reasons. Jews are hated because they are capitalists. Jews are hated because they are communists, according to different anti-Semitic narratives. Jews are hated because they are poor, and they are hated because they are rich. There is no logical explanation so far for anti-Semitism. Of course, as far as we know, Hitler was, at least if we are to judge by Mein Kampf and what we know about the Nazi ideology, he was a nationalist, very disappointed with the loss of Germany during the World War I, when, by the way, he was a young soldier, and he later became a very versatile populist who was able to climb upon the German disappointment with the loss of Germany during the World War I. So he used anti-Semitism, and his main explanation was that Germany lost the World War I up to a certain extent because of the influence of a so-called Jewish elite that runs the world. This story with this myth of a Jewish elite running the world is not new, and we find it also in the Tsarist Empire, where the Tsarist secret services wrote a book which is until today very popular, a very anti-Semitic book. The title in English would be The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So this book was using the same myth, that there is a Jewish elite which is a capitalist one, and which tries to take over the world, to dominate the entire economy, and to have influence in every corner of the politics and of economy. While the Tsarist book was accusing, this Jews as being like, capitalists and strong, and dominating. Hitler was approaching the Jews as being they were like responsible for the communism, but using still the same myth with the Jews running the world, like the Jewish elite. So it is very difficult to say. There are like many discussions in this regard. Of course, there are researchers who say that there was this strong ideological dimension of Hitler's anti-Semitism. Some researchers also bring into discussion the fact that there was an economic dimension of this, because indeed there was a high number of Jews who were involved in the German industry at that time. And some researchers say that Hitler was interested in confiscating many of their properties and businesses in order to finance his war. This is a very long discussion. I would say that as a paradox and as an interesting fact, that in the beginning, we know that the state of Israel was established in 1948, but the project is goes back about 100 years, let's say, in a systematic manner, when we have the Basel Conference at the end of the 19th century, the first Zionist Congress. So I would say I would like to mention, and with this I will close my intervention. In the beginning, the Nazis were supporting the idea of a Jewish state. What was the reason for which they were supporting this idea? They were thinking that Jews cannot survive outside Europe. So sending them to Palestine, which was a very hostile place at that time, would be a sure recipe for exterminating them naturally. They will not survive there, because according to the Nazi ideology, Jews can survive only in this, economic, industrial, developed world, and sending them out there would be like a good idea in order to exterminate them. So there are like many contradicting reasons, and the more you continue to read on this topic, you'll find that like sometimes like some of them are like hilarious, because the contradictions are like, hilarious and cynical in the same time. But I hope that I could touch like at least 5% of this whole reply to your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I know Oana wanted to add something, and if Simina would like to also add a few things just to wrap up this discussion, we will leave the floor open on Facebook. We still have lots of food for thought and lots of questions there, so we will invite everyone to take a look there and also answer to more questions. Seems that your insight have opened lots of curiosities from our viewers. So we will invite you to go to our Facebook and share some more insights. So Oana and Simina, if you'd like to also add anything else.
Yeah, so just to add maybe 5% more to what Daniel said, but also to wrap up a little bit. Dictators and populists need scapegoats in order for them to appear as saviors. They need to create this idea that there is a danger, and then they will save everybody. And, you know, this is what Hitler did, and this is what populists do today. They create the impression of danger, and they blame the others. And as it happened in Germany, the others, one of the most visible others, were the Jews. And Hitler, what he did, he built on anti-Semitism that existed for thousands of years, and it was based again on stereotypes. And stereotypes played an important role to perpetuate anti-Semitism for thousands of years, as I mentioned, and then Hitler and the Nazis took it to another level. And today we have something, you know, similar to what Daniel said. Unfortunately, we still have anti-Semitism today in Europe, which is unconceivable. It's clearly we haven't learned anything yet. And we also have other forms of scapegoating. For example, when we talk about immigrants, there's this narrative that immigrants are coming to Europe to steal our jobs, but there's also the narrative that they are lazy and they don't work, exactly how Daniel presented these opposing narratives. And they are based on this, first of all, on the stereotypes, but also on the willingness of some people to grab power by portraying themselves as saviors from a perceived danger. And the danger is the others.
If I may also say something really just as a wrap up, is that I'm really happy to see so many young people preoccupied with these issues. So I really invite everyone to, if not to come to Brussels, because I know this is very difficult, but in this online and digital world, it is actually possible to visit our museum and to be part in our events in many ways. So I really encourage you to look at our website and our Facebook page, because we have there, and I was really reminded by this discussion about the protocols of the Elders of Zion and about stereotypes. We actually have a temporary exhibition right now, which is called Fake for Real, a history of forgery and falsification, in which we deal with forgeries and falsifications of history also, but of many other things all throughout history. And one of our subjects is actually the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So we really tell the whole long story of how this forgery was produced and the effects of this. We talk about anti-Semitism in this chapter, and also in the one on the Dreyfus affair. So we really, it could be interesting for you. We made some video guided tours that you can see on our YouTube page. So there is a way, let's say, to visit the exhibition, even if you are not able to really come to Brussels. But that was all I wanted to say. Congratulations, and thank you for inviting me, and keep being interested and curious. That's the most important thing.
Thank you all for being here and for sharing with us your insights. We will make sure we share with our viewers all the links, and hopefully we will continue the discussion on Facebook. There are lots of questions there still unanswered. So we opened the floor for many young people, educators, youth workers that are interested in making the human rights education more effectively and efficient in this time. So thank you so much for being here, and we are looking forward to seeing you to the next event. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.